Christmas morning in Darien, Connecticut, a place often likened to a snow globe of wealth and tranquility, shattered like broken glass on December 25, 2021, when 34-year-old Madison Whitaker was found strangled to death in the master bedroom of the $1.6 million colonial she shared with her husband, Daniel. The image of the perfect couple had been carefully maintained for years. Daniel, 39, was a well-regarded financial consultant, disciplined and soft-spoken, who made his daily commute to Stanford in tailored suits and kept his social life quiet and minimal. Madison, with her luminous presence and toned elegance, was known locally for her boutique wellness brand, her yoga classes, and a social media feed full of self-care mantras and filtered morning light. They had met in 2013 at a Manhattan charity gala and were married by the summer of 2015. Madison in a custom Vera Wang, Daniel in Armani, with vows that spoke of devotion and partnership. In 2018, they moved into a sprawling home on Wintermere Drive, where neighbors described them as polite, but not overly involved in the community. To outsiders, theirs was a marriage built on stability and discretion. But it was only after Madison's body was discovered, and Daniel placed that haunting 911 call, his voice distant, shaking, but oddly composed, that investigators would begin to peel back the layers of a life that, in retrospect, had been split in two. According to interviews and court records, there had been signs, fleeting ones, but signs nonetheless. Madison often traveled to New York under the pretext of business meetings for her brand, sometimes staying overnight without much explanation. She had 2 phones, something Daniel reportedly questioned once, only to be told one was strictly for client and vendor contacts. Friends recall her laughing it off, saying she needed separation between personal peace and professional chaos. Daniel, as it would later come out through colleagues and his therapist's testimony, began withdrawing socially in the final months of 2021, describing feeling adrift and disconnected, though he did not initially suspect anything sinister. Neighbors mentioned unusual activity at the Whitaker home when Daniel was away, sporadic visits by unknown men, luxury cars idling in the driveway at odd hours, and one particularly attentive neighbor, whose timeline would become part of the trial, remembered seeing a man leave the home around 2:15 a.m. on November 12. Though Madison was well-liked and admired, especially among the suburban wellness set, her life outside Darien was murkier. All of that began to unravel on December 7th, when Daniel received an anonymous email sent to his work account from a burner address. Subject line: "Your wife isn't who you think she is." The message contained a series of screenshots from a high-end escort directory called Elite Vixens, showing images unmistakably of Madison, though her face was partially obscured. The alias listed was Sasha Claire, and the ads hinted at services that contradicted everything Daniel believed about the woman he had built a life with. According to his later confession and testimony, Daniel initially dismissed it as a cruel prank or blackmail attempt, but the seed of suspicion had been planted. He obsessed over the photos, compared them to ones from Madison's old modeling portfolio, and in a move that prosecutors would later describe as controlled but increasingly unstable, he hired a private investigator from Manhattan on December 9th. The PI, a former NYPD detective, began tailing Madison on her so-called work trips and confirmed what the email had implied. Over a span of just 2 weeks, Madison was observed meeting multiple male clients at luxury hotels in Midtown Manhattan, including the Langham and the Peninsula. PI gathered surveillance footage, confirming she used a second phone registered under an alias, and even compiled financial records from her Venmo and Cash App accounts, showing payments consistent with high-end escort rates, upwards of $1,500 per hour. Investigators later verified that these transactions were often accompanied by coded messages or emoji that concealed their real nature. Daniel received the full report on December 22nd. Interviews with his therapist and coworkers would later reveal a stark change in behavior over those final days. Erratic work attendance, a fixation on surveillance footage, and hours spent alone in his study, staring blankly at documents. And yet, he told no one, not his therapist, not a single friend. On December 23rd, he confronted Madison in what police could only reconstruct from Daniel's confession and the audio logs he began making of their conversations. He had purchased a small recorder, hidden in his office, and while he never detailed the exact contents to investigators, He stated during interrogation that what he heard in her voice, the mockery, the casualness with which she discussed her double life, was unbearable. Madison, for her part, carried on outwardly unshaken. On Christmas Eve, the couple attended a neighborhood dinner party. Witnesses later testified that Madison appeared cheerful and radiant, more affectionate with Daniel than usual. One guest said she joked about needing some real rest tomorrow. While Daniel barely spoke, another described his demeanor as vacant, like he was watching something unravel behind his eyes. That night, while Madison slept, Daniel disconnected the indoor security cameras, an action confirmed by the home's security provider logs, showing a manual deactivation around midnight. In retrospect, the facade of normalcy had already been stripped away, replaced by a suffocating silence. No one in that snow-covered neighborhood, wrapped in lights and wreaths, had any idea what would unfold just 7 hours later inside that pristine white colonial on Wintermere Drive. In the days following his receipt of the investigators' final report, Daniel Whitaker's psychological state took a sharp and deliberate turn. According to records from his therapist, who testified in court after the fact, Daniel missed his final 2 appointments before Christmas and failed to return calls. He was described in notes as emotionally flooded, showing signs of ruminative thinking and obsessive fixation, though at the time, the therapist had no idea what he had discovered. The investigator's dossier, later entered into evidence, was damning in its completeness. High-resolution surveillance photos of Madison arriving alone at upscale hotels, leaving hours later in designer clothing clearly not worn on arrival, and even audio snippets of her conversing discreetly with hotel staff under the alias Ms. Claire. Her client list, while not exhaustive, included businessmen, out-of-towners, and one local philanthropist whose identity was sealed during trial proceedings due to ongoing investigations. The digital footprint was equally incriminating. Her second phone was filled with encrypted messaging apps, and financial forensics experts confirmed a steady flow of unreported income over 18 months, often deposited into a secondary account opened under her maiden name. According to the forensic accountant brought in by the prosecution, Madison had netted close to $180,000 in untaxed earnings since mid-2020. Daniel, as investigators would later note, did not confront her immediately. Instead, he internalized the betrayal, began cataloging pieces of her deception, and spiraled into a quiet paranoia. One coworker reported seeing him at the office late into the night on December 20th, sitting alone in the break room, staring at his phone without moving. That same day, Daniel purchased a miniature audio recorder from a Best Buy in Norwalk, the receipt of which was submitted as part of the prosecution's evidence of planning. He began recording their private conversations without Madison's knowledge, storing the files on an encrypted folder on his laptop. Though most of these recordings were never made public, court documents confirmed that at least one captured Madison referencing the city and how her branding clients are such babies sometimes, in what Daniel interpreted as veiled references to her escort work. On December 23rd, Daniel finally confronted her. This much is known from his confession, but what exactly was said remains unclear. He told investigators that she denied everything, mocked him for snooping, and accused him of being insecure, but he admitted that the interaction was not violent. Friends of Madison would later speculate that she may have thought he would never act on the information, believing him to be passive and conflict avoidant. But according to behavioral psychologists brought in during the trial, Daniel's reaction was a textbook example of cognitive dissonance collapsing. His reality had ruptured, and he began plotting not consciously, but methodically. The next day, Christmas Eve, Daniel and Madison attended a neighborhood dinner party hosted by close friends from their yoga studio network. Several guests later gave interviews to local media and testified in court, each remarking on how affectionate Madison had been. One even described her as giddy, as if relieved of some internal burden. Daniel, in contrast, barely spoke beyond monosyllables and, when questioned about work, responded only with, "It's been a hell of a week." Surveillance footage from the front porch cam of the host's home captured the couple leaving around 11:17 p.m., with Madison laughing and adjusting her scarf, and Daniel trailing slightly behind her with his eyes fixed downward. The most chilling detail, confirmed by technical logs submitted to court, is that sometime between 12:23 a.m. and 12:30 a.m. on December 25th, Daniel manually disabled all 3 indoor Nest security cameras from the app on his phone. He made no effort to disable the exterior ones. That same night, Madison sent a brief, cryptic message to an unsaved number on her second phone that read, "Tomorrow's going to be complicated. I'll call when I can." Investigators were never able to trace the recipient. What exactly Madison meant by that remains a matter of speculation. Did she know Daniel was onto her? Had she already been planning to leave him? And most haunting of all, did she sense what was coming as the cold, quiet hours of Christmas morning crept toward dawn? At approximately 7:42 a.m. on December 25, 2021, Daniel Whitaker dialed 911 from the kitchen of his Darien home. His voice described by the dispatcher as flat, shaken, but deliberate. According to the official call transcript, he stated, "My wife. She's not breathing. I think I killed her." First responders arrived on the scene within 8 minutes, finding Madison Whitaker's body on the bedroom floor beside the bed, still dressed in the red silk robe she had worn to bed, with visible bruising around her neck and upper chest, and signs consistent with manual strangulation, including petechiae in the eyes and broken capillaries on her cheeks. There were no signs of forced entry, no evidence of struggle in the room beyond a toppled lamp, and nothing to suggest an intruder. Daniel was seated on the staircase, unmoving, and did not resist when officers placed him in handcuffs. At the station, he waived his right to an attorney and gave a statement that lasted nearly 3 hours, during which he admitted to killing Madison with his bare hands shortly after she woke up and began speaking to him, as if none of it mattered. In his official statement, which was later submitted in court, Daniel described waking early and watching her sleep, consumed by what he called a wave of disgust and grief. And when she stirred and allegedly dismissed his questions, he said he snapped. Investigators were quick to note, however, that his actions showed signs of premeditation, particularly the deactivation of the home's interior security system hours earlier, and the meticulous manner in which he had documented her double life in the days prior. A full forensic search of the home uncovered a wealth of digital evidence. Madison's second phone, found locked in a cabinet behind her yoga gear, contained hundreds of messages between her and clients, as well as scheduling software under a pseudonym. Venmo records on her tablet, linked to a secondary bank account under her maiden name, showed deposits from dozens of unique accounts using ambiguous notes like session, retreat, or simply emojis. Investigators also found neatly stacked envelopes of cash totaling nearly $14,000 in a locked box in her closet, along with high-end lingerie, 2 hotel keycards, and a prepaid debit card with over $9,000 in unused balance. Daniel's laptop contained the private investigator's report, spreadsheets tracking her appointments, and transcripts of several recorded conversations between him and Madison from the days leading up to her death. The media response was immediate and relentless. Within days, the story had exploded nationally under sensationalized headlines like "Christmas Killer Exposes Escort Wife's Secret Life" and "Murder in Fairfield County." Double life, double tragedy. Tabloids focused not just on the murder but on Madison's identity as Sasha Clare, with escort forums posting tributes and former clients anonymously confirming her as one of the most sought-after companions in New York's elite underground. Public opinion fractured. Some portrayed Daniel as a heartbroken man pushed to the edge by betrayal, while others saw only cold-blooded control and male entitlement. In February 2022, Daniel was formally indicted for second-degree murder, though prosecutors successfully argued for an elevation to intentional murder based on the evidence of planning. His defense, led by attorney Julia Reiner, attempted to build a case around temporary insanity, citing emotional trauma, betrayal, and mental collapse. A psychiatric evaluation by Dr. Ellis Monroe concluded that while Daniel had experienced acute stress and depressive symptoms, he was mentally competent and aware of his actions at the time of the murder. The trial began on September 12, 2022, in Stamford Superior Court and drew overwhelming media attention. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Caroline Sue, constructed a detailed timeline showing Daniel's slow psychological deterioration, his gathering of evidence, the calculated disabling of the surveillance system, and the physical act of strangulation that took an estimated 30 to 45 seconds, time the prosecutor argued, to stop. The defense attempted to humanize Daniel, calling his therapist, who testified that Daniel had been struggling with emotional repression and feelings of abandonment, and highlighting that Daniel did not attempt to flee and confessed immediately. But jurors were visibly shaken by the forensics and the cold clarity with which Daniel had arranged every step of his confrontation. On October 21, 2022, after 2 days of deliberation, the jury returned a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder in the second degree with intent. Judge Leah Hofstetler delivered the sentence on November 2, 28 years to life in prison, with the earliest possibility of parole in 2045. As the gavel fell, Daniel showed no reaction. Madison's parents, who had flown in from Portland, Oregon, sat silently through the hearing, clutching a framed photograph of their daughter taken on her wedding day. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed the exits as the community of Darien, once a haven of manicured lawns and holiday cards, struggled to make sense of how a marriage that looked perfect from the outside had concealed so many devastating secrets, and how, on the most sacred morning of the year, it had ended in silence, violence, and the irreversible collapse of 2 carefully constructed lives.